The fluorescent lights of the law office buzzed overhead as I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the weight of the diamond ring hidden inside. Eleanor's sobs echoed through the sterile room, her mascara streaming down her cheeks as the lawyer's monotone voice continued reading Uncle Harold's will. "To my beloved niece Rebecca," the lawyer announced, adjusting his glasses, "I leave my entire estate, including the Victorian mansion on Maple Street, the antique collection, and all financial assets totaling $2.3 million. The room fell silent, except for Eleanor's. I had no idea then that he'd already changed his will, or that he'd left me the engagement ring he'd bought for her. The ring she'd been expecting for over a decade. The truth was suffocating me. Eleanor had been cheating on Uncle Harold with his business partner David for 3 years. I'd discovered their affair by accident, walking in on them at the mansion last month. The image was burned into my memory. Eleanor's laugh, David's hands on her waist, the way they froze when they saw me. But Eleanor didn't know that I knew. She had no idea that Uncle Harold had hired a private investigator, or that he'd spent his final weeks heartbroken, rewriting his will and planning his quiet revenge from beyond the grave. "I always knew he liked you," Eleanor sobbed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "But I never thought he'd do this. After everything we shared, after all the promises." The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's more," he said, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Mr. Harold left specific instructions for this letter to be read aloud." My blood ran cold. What else had Uncle Harold planned? As Eleanor's sobs grew louder and the other family members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, I realized that this was just the beginning. The ring in my purse felt heavier with each passing second, and I knew that once that letter was opened, there would be no going back. The lawyer's fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal, and I held my breath, wondering if Uncle Harold's final words would expose the truth I'd been carrying, or create an even bigger secret I'd have to live with forever. The lawyer unfolded the letter with deliberate care, his eyes scanning the contents before he began reading in his measured tone. "My dearest family," he started, "if you are hearing this, then I have passed on, and my final wishes are being fulfilled. I want you to know that every decision in this will was made with careful consideration and full awareness of the truth." Eleanor's crying subsided into hiccups as she strained to listen, her red-rimmed eyes fixed on the lawyer. I felt my palms growing sweaty, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles had turned white. "To Eleanor," the lawyer continued, "I want you to know that I loved you deeply for many years. However, love built on deception cannot stand the test of time. I discovered your affair with David 3 months ago, and while my heart is broken, I harbor no hatred toward you. I simply cannot reward dishonesty with my life's work." The gasp that escaped Eleanor's lips was audible throughout the room. Several family members turned to stare at her, their expressions shifting from sympathy to shock. David, who had been sitting quietly in the back row, suddenly stood up and headed for the door. "David, don't you dare leave!" Eleanor screamed, jumping from her chair. But he was already gone, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The lawyer waited for the commotion to settle before continuing. "Rebecca, my dear niece, you have always been honest with me, even when the truth was difficult to bear. In my desk drawer at home, you will find something that belonged to your grandmother. Something I had intended for Eleanor, but now rightfully belongs to someone who values truth above comfort. I felt the blood drain from my face. The engagement ring I'd found while cleaning out his house last week. He'd known I would discover it. This had all been orchestrated. Eleanor collapsed back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. "Rebecca," she whispered without looking up. "Did you know? Did you know about David and me?" The entire room turned. I thought about that terrible day when I'd walk in on them, about the sleepless nights wondering whether I should tell Uncle Harold, about the relief I'd felt when I realized he already knew. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I knew. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor finally looked up at me, her expression a mixture of hurt and understanding. "How long?" she asked. "A month before he died," I admitted, feeling tears beginning to form in my eyes. "I walked in on you and David at the house. I didn't know what to do, Eleanor. I wanted to tell him, but I was scared it would kill him." Eleanor's face crumpled. "It did kill him," she said softly, "just slower than if you'd told him directly." The lawyer cleared his throat again, holding up the letter. "There's still more," he said gently, and I realized Uncle Harold's final message wasn't finished. "Rebecca, I need you to understand that discovering the truth didn't destroy me. It freed me. For months, I had felt Eleanor pulling away, and I blamed myself. Learning about the affair helped me realize that some relationships simply run their course, regardless of how much love we invest in them. Eleanor lifted her head, mascara streaking down her cheeks like black tears. "Harold always was too good for his own good," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I am leaving Eleanor the lake house in Vermont," the lawyer continued reading. "It's where we spent our happiest moments together, and I want her to have somewhere to start over. The mortgage is paid in full, and there's a small trust fund to help with maintenance, enough for a modest but comfortable life." This revelation caused everyone to look at Eleanor again, but with less judgment than before. Uncle Harold hadn't left her completely without resources. He'd been characteristically thoughtful, even in his disappointment. "And as for David," the lawyer read on, "he will find his partnership in my business has been dissolved. The contracts were structured to allow for this contingency. However, I've written him a letter of recommendation. His skills as an architect were never in question, only his character as a man." I watched Eleanor's face transform as she processed this information. The initial shock was giving way to something else. Perhaps gratitude, or maybe just exhaustion from carrying the weight of her secret for so long. "Rebecca," Eleanor said suddenly, turning to face me directly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My heart started racing again. "Okay," I managed to say. "When you found out about David and me, why didn't you confront us? Why didn't you tell Harold immediately?" I took a deep breath, remembering that awful moment of discovery. "Because I saw how happy you looked. For just a second, before you realized I was there, I saw you laughing with David in a way I hadn't seen you laugh in years. And I thought maybe Uncle Harold deserved to be with someone who could laugh like that with him." Eleanor's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Oh, Rebecca," she whispered, "you don't understand. I stopped being able to laugh like that with Harold because I was terrified he'd see right through me. The guilt was eating me alive. The lawyer folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "That concludes Mr. Harold's final message," he announced. "Are there any questions about the will?" "You heard the letter. He forgave you." She looked up at me through her tears. "But can you forgive me? Can you forgive me for betraying not just Harold, but this entire family?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with years of shared memories and broken trust. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, looking at Eleanor's tear-stained face. The question of forgiveness wasn't simple. It carried the weight of Uncle Harold's broken heart, years of deception, and the complicated love I still felt for the woman who had been like a second mother to me. "Eleanor," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt, "forgiveness isn't something I can just decide right now. But what I can tell you is that Uncle Harold's last weeks weren't filled with hatred. He talked about you constantly, about the good times you shared, about how much he hoped you'd find happiness." She wiped her eyes with a tissue someone had handed her. "He was always too kind," she whispered. The lawyer began shuffling his papers, clearly eager to conclude the formal proceedings. Other family members started gathering their belongings, whispering among themselves about the shocking revelations. But Eleanor and I remained seated, the space between us charged with unfinished business. "There's something else," I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out the small velvet box I'd been carrying. "I found this in Uncle Harold's desk." The letter mentioned something that belonged to Grandmother. Eleanor's breath caught as she recognized the box. "Is that?" I opened it slowly, revealing the vintage diamond ring that had belonged to my grandmother. The ring Uncle Harold had bought back from an estate sale years ago, intending to propose to Eleanor on their 15th anniversary, which would have been next month. "He was going to ask you to marry him," I said softly, "even after he found out about David. He'd already bought the ring." Eleanor's composure finally shattered completely. She doubled over in her chair, sobbing with a grief so raw that several people in the room stopped what they were doing to stare. The weight of what she'd lost, not just Uncle Harold's fortune, but his unwavering love and devotion, seemed to hit her all at once. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she cried. "Not from him, not from you. Not from anyone. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me for cheap thrills and feeling desired by someone new." I closed the ring box and placed it back in my purse. According to the will, it was mine now, but holding it felt like carrying someone else's broken dreams. "Eleanor, look at me," I said firmly. She raised her head, her eyes swollen and red. "Uncle Harold left you the lake house for a reason. He wanted you to have a chance to start over, to figure out who you are without the weight of this secret. Maybe that's your path to redemption." She nodded slowly, accepting the tissue box someone offered. "What about you, Rebecca? What are you going to do with all of this?" She gestured vaguely, encompassing both the inheritance and the emotional wreckage surrounding us. I thought about the Victorian mansion that was now mine, about Uncle Harold's antique collection, and the responsibility that came with preserving his legacy. But mostly, I thought about the conversation we'd had 2 weeks before he died, when he'd told me he was proud of the woman I'd become. "I'm going to honor his memory," I said, "and maybe, eventually, we can figure out how to honor what the three of us used to be, before everything got complicated." Eleanor stood up, gathering her purse and coat. The other family members had mostly dispersed, leaving just us, the lawyer, and the heavy silence of unresolved grief. "Rebecca, she said as she reached the door. "Thank you for not hating me." "I never said I didn't hate you," I replied honestly. "I said forgiveness would take time. But Eleanor, Uncle Harold was right. You deserve a chance to start over. Just don't waste it." She nodded and walked out, leaving me alone with the lawyer and the overwhelming realization that my life had just changed forever. The ring box felt heavier in my purse as I signed the final papers, officially becoming the inheritor of Uncle Harold's world, and all the secrets that came with it. 3 months had passed since the reading of Uncle Harold's will, and I was finally ready to walk through the Victorian mansion that now belonged to me. The autumn air was crisp as I turned the key in the heavy oak door, stepping into the foyer where dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through stained glass windows. The house felt different without Uncle Harold's presence, quieter, but somehow more peaceful. I'd spent weeks avoiding this moment, staying in my apartment downtown while lawyers handled the paperwork and estate details. But today felt right for beginning this new chapter. I made my way to Uncle Harold's study, where everything remained exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses still sat folded on his mahogany desk, next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. I opened the desk drawer he'd mentioned in his letter, finding not just the ring box, but also a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. The top letter was addressed to me in his familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. "My dear Rebecca, if you're reading this, then you've found the courage to truly begin your inheritance. These letters are stories about your grandmother. Stories I never had the chance to tell you while I was alive." I settled into his leather chair and spent the next hour reading about my grandmother's life, her dreams, her struggles, and most importantly, about the love she'd shared with my grandfather. Uncle Harold had written about resilience, about how love sometimes means letting go, and about the importance of choosing forgiveness over bitterness. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted my reading. Through the window, I saw Eleanor's familiar sedan. My heart raced. We hadn't spoken since that day at the lawyer's office. I met her at the front door, and I was surprised by how different she looked. Her hair was shorter, more natural, and she wore a simple blue sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. There was something calmer about her presence. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said quietly. "I needed to see the house one more time before I moved to Vermont permanently." I stepped aside to let her in. "How has it been at the lake house?" Eleanor walked slowly through the familiar rooms, her fingers trailing along surfaces she'd once cleaned and decorated. "Peaceful," she said finally. "Lonely, but peaceful. I've had time to think about who I was, who I became, and who I want to be." We ended up in the kitchen, where I made tea using Uncle Harold's favorite cups. Eleanor sat at the small table where the three of us had shared countless meals and conversations. "I've been going to counseling," she said, accepting the steaming mug I offered, "trying to understand why I sabotaged the best relationship I ever had. It's been difficult." I sat across from her, studying her face. The guilt was still there, but it seemed tempered by something else. Acceptance, maybe, or the beginning of self-forgiveness. "I found letters Uncle Harold wrote about my grandmother," I said. "He wrote about forgiveness, about how holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears than the ones she'd cried months ago. These seemed cleaner somehow. Rebecca, I need you to know that I loved Harold. Not perfectly. Not faithfully, but genuinely. And I'm grateful every day that he found the strength to forgive me before he died. I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt strange. This gesture that once would have been automatic now required conscious choice and effort. I know you loved him, I said, and I know he loved you. Maybe that's enough. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our tea and processing the complex emotions that had brought us to this moment. Eleanor eventually stood to leave, but she paused at the kitchen doorway. "What will you do with this place?" she asked. I looked around the kitchen, imagining it filled with laughter and new memories. "I think I'll keep it exactly as it is for now. But someday, maybe I'll fill it with a family of my own. Uncle Harold always said this house was meant for love and laughter." Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. He would like that very much. After she left, I returned to Uncle Harold's study and pulled out the engagement ring. The diamond caught the late afternoon light, throwing tiny rainbows across the desk. I thought about putting it away permanently, but instead I placed it on the windowsill where it could catch the sunlight each day. It would stay there as a reminder, not of broken promises or lost love, but of the complexity of human hearts and the power of forgiveness. Uncle Harold had taught me that some stories don't end with perfect resolution, but with the quiet understanding that people are capable of both great harm and great love, sometimes simultaneously. As the sun began to set over the Victorian mansion, painting the walls in golden hues, I felt Uncle Harold's presence one final time, not as a ghost or supernatural force, but as the lasting impact of a man who chose love over bitterness, even in his final moments.